political editor Ryan Sabey and the community editor for The National, Shona Craven. Good to have you both with us. Ryan, let's start inside the Mail. Page 2, flatlining, they say. Well, we know they're talking about the economy.
Yeah, Rachel Reeves, enough headaches dealing with the economy, and there was the news yesterday that the economy for January had actually had zero growth. But these figures were actually all compiled before the Middle East conflict. So where just 10 days ago or so, the Chancellor said the economic plan is the right one, the country is turning a corner, all that seems to be put to, to one side. And, big economies, sectors in the UK, construction, manufacturing, services, all struggling. And it actually, there's a few experts yesterday were saying because of the oil price, because of it could sort of, you could see a surge in inflation. Britain could almost tip into a recession this year. Now, a technical recession is 2 quarters of negative growth. So I think at the moment we're a long way from that. But I think with the sort of magnitude of everything that is going on, we just don't know.
But when growth is 0.1%, sometimes that's revised either way. It could end up being flat. And look, reading further down this article, there is that terrifying word of stagflation, inflation going up, but the economy not growing, interest rates rising, and people having less money in their pocket, which is something that afflicted Japan for an awfully long time.
And I think this is one of the big problems when it comes to, sort of living standards. This country, many other countries, has had a big problem since the financial crisis. People just don't feel better off. And if you speak to Rachel Reeves, you speak to Keir Starmer, one of the big measures they say they will be tested on when voters go to the polls next will be if people feel better off in the pocket. And at the moment, it just doesn't feel like that.
But just interestingly, the headline underneath flatline is raise income tax, says Labour think tank. Will hit people even harder at the moment. I wonder how much, well, that'll go down in 11 Downing Street.
Well, no, absolutely. And they have repeatedly, their mantra is that cost of living is their priority and making life affordable for people. But they're not going to like the front page of the FT, are they, Shona? Because they're suggesting that the root of this latest problem, the rising oil price, that might carry on for some time.
Yeah, we just don't know. I mean, in the Mail story, they've got an economist saying stagflation is round the corner, but the whole point is we cannot see round corners and we don't know how long this is going to last. And, it feels like very recent that people were warning about the price of crude oil going past $100 a barrel. And of course, we've already passed that. And as it says here, Tehran has warned the world to prepare for $200 oil. And again, with Donald Trump having said just on Monday that the war was essentially over, he's now saying the US has unlimited ammunition and could keep fighting against Iran forever. So we don't have a timescale, and that does make it very, very difficult for any government anywhere in the world to plan. But of course, what you don't want is to be starting from a pretty poor position of zero growth, because then, yes, it will be a bit like COVID in the sense that people will look back and say, oh, well, we had to deal with this, we had to deal with that. But then opponents will point and say, well, even before that, there was no growth, and so your plan was the wrong one.
Yeah, and not much money in the coffers to try and tackle some of the issues that it throws up. Should we move on to the Daily Telegraph? Ryan. They are one of many papers this morning that have this new photograph that's emerged from the Epstein files showing Jeffrey Epstein with both Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor and Peter Mandelson. And worth stressing that just appearing in the photograph, appearing in the files, is not an indication of wrongdoing, and those two deny any wrongdoing. But this is another reminder of Peter Mandelson and his appointment not so long ago as UK ambassador to the US, and the questions for Keir Starmer over that.
Yeah, the questions of was there enough vetting done, and did he listen to that advice that he was given? Now, the story here is that Lord Doyle was one of the Matthew Doyle, who was a director of communications, was one of the people who went through that sort of vetting process. He then came back and said he was satisfied with the answers that Mandelson had given him. Morgan McSweeney as well was part of that process. But all the way through this, and there was a due diligence report that was given to Keir Starmer, he just decided that he wanted to press ahead with it. So they could have thrown up all sorts of ramifications and potential problems down the line. There was an issue of a reputational risk in that report as well. So it was all there for Keir Starmer to see, but he pressed ahead with it.
But he was also trusting his advisors, and both Morgan McSweeney and Matthew Doyle were friends with Peter Mandelson. They were seeing him certainly Matthew Doyle was seeing him socially during this process too.
And I think that may have been, you know, that it could be one of the problems with the whole vetting process and the whole appointment process is, you know, should people with, you know, close friendships or alliances with politicians, should they really be at the heart of this? Should this be left to the civil service? Should this be left to an outside body to take it on? So, and I think, you know, they clearly wanted this person. Were they asking the right questions? Did they want to hear the right the answers? They just seemed like they were pressing ahead with it regardless.
Do you think this cuts through to the public, Shona? Because lots of the conversation that's been had is about process. You know, the Tories and the Lib Dems both complaining about some of this and saying that there are gaps in the documents. But do you think that... Where do you think the public is on this? Do you think they're engaged and feel it's a problem?
I think that the overall message is this all stinks. And I think people could be forgiven, it sounds awful to say, for losing track of which disgraced person was connected to which disgraced sex offender, because Lord Doyle here resigned after it emerged he campaigned on behalf of a sex offender, which was a Scottish counsellor. But then you've got, obviously, the whole point is that you're investigating someone's links with a sex offender, but then the person who's investigating those links has themselves a similar connection. So we don't know what questions he asked. Keir Starmer says Mandelson lied. Mandelson says, I didn't lie, because presumably he wasn't asked these questions. But are we including a lie by omission? Surely the vetting process, at least one of the questions has to be, is there anything we should worry about? And so that's a very broad question. Maybe that wasn't even asked. We don't know. So it does raise huge questions, because you then think, well, who else hasn't been vetted properly?
I think, in fairness to Matthew Doyle, Lord Doyle, he campaigned for that councillor prior to the conviction. He was in contact with him afterwards.
There were
that has to
actually
be
two
said.
different cases. So
Yes.
there was two different convictions.
Yeah.
So that's kind of dripped out over time.
Yes, it has. Should we switch to The Sun? And I think it'd be too easy to give it to Ryan, so why don't we start with you?
Because it's his own paper.
Because it's his own
and,
paper.
you know.
You can pick up in a minute, but Shona, let's start with you. The headline, NEAT ideas to get youth into work. NEAT as in not in employment, education or training, the acronym there. What have the government got in mind for young people?
Yeah, so this is a huge issue of people who, you know, their lives are stalled, basically. They've not sort of progressed into adulthood. And it mentions Alan Milburn, saying that, you know, you have people who are young and they're signed off with sickness or for disability, but that these conditions should not actually prevent someone from working. So it's about that starting point with a job. And so this is a package aimed at getting nearly 1 million jobless young people into work. One thing that Ryan can speak to is ministers are concerned that the apprenticeship levy, which is given to firms to hire youngsters, is being abused by bosses hiring graduates instead. I wouldn't have thought the two things were mutually exclusive, but...
Yeah, I think one of the issues is there's a management apprenticeship and more people are getting into that at sort of a higher level, but they actually want younger people to get on.
We're
Back
out of
after the
time.
break.
Nice to have your company. Thank you.
What's the best thing about being a Sky News journalist?